Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on modernizing banks for Philippines' digital generation. Special thanks to the speakers for taking the time to be with us today and also for Backbase for sponsoring this webinar. Now, the world has been on the track of be on track on for digital trajectory for as long as we can remember. Whenever we discuss about a digital Filipino population stats like over 130% mobile penetration, over 60% internet penetration are often thrown around. You couple that with the very obvious observation that the pandemic has accelerated digital adoption. It has made it clearer now more than ever that banks need to step up their digital proposition. But beyond just providing urban Filipinos with a superior digital financial service experience, digital technologies have a much more important role to play in driving financial inclusion in the nation. Today, we are very pleased to be joined by some of the top executives from some of the top banks in the Philippines and the regulator themselves to talk about the industry's concerted effort to cater to the changing demographic in the Philippines and also to address crucial social goals as well. Welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us, everybody. So, obviously, one of the biggest and hottest topic that is happening in the Philippines right now is the introduction of the new digital banks, with Banko Sentral and Filipinas having just approved one of the banks. So pretty exciting times today. Joining us today, we have Chuchi Fonacier, the Deputy Governor of Financial Supervision Sector under Banko Sentral and Filipinas. We have Noel Santiago, who's at the bottom of the screen there, who is the Chief Digital Officer of Bank of the Philippine Islands. Then we have Henry Aguda, who's below Chuchi. Henry is a man of many hats. He is the Senior Executive Vice President, Chief Technology and Operation Officer, Chief Transformation Officer of the UnionBank, and also Chairman of UBX Philippines as well. Last but not least, we're also joined by Rudy Dutta, who is the Regional Head for ASEAN and South Asia for Backbase. Now, going back to the whole digital banking framework in which BSP has issued one license for OF Bank, let's begin by having Chuchi on the floor to talk about the implications of this new digital banking framework on financial inclusion and also the incumbent banks as well. Chuchi, you have the floor. Feel free.
Yeah, thank you, Vincent. Yeah, actually, for the digital banks, they will definitely complement as well the existing traditional banks. And but what's the an advantage maybe for the not necessarily to the digital bank, but this is really for the unbanked and the underbanked, given that with of course and the electronic platform that can be made use of, definitely in onboarding clients, especially in far-flung areas, that can really be a game changer for digital banks, especially that we're an archipelago, and so there will definitely be challenges in trying to reach those areas wherein traditional banks would maybe find it not efficient to have, let's say, a brick and mortar, and so the digital banks would really be a boost as well for financial inclusion in the Philippines. But a lot of other factors, of course, have to be considered, and that goes along with this will part of the digital finance infrastructure. But of course, also the digital identification, EKYC, and all those things, which can be made use of by digital banks, would really help a lot in the financial inclusion side of the BSP's efforts in achieving that goal. Yes,
Thank
Vincent,
you,
thanks.
Chuchi. So I guess, like, with over 7,000 islands in the Philippines, it doesn't make sense to have a branch in every one of it, right? Digital is probably the way to go for
Exactly.
this. A
Exactly.
lot of teams you brought up. we're definitely going to dive a little bit into that a bit later. But now let's have Henry on stage to share his views about how he foresees the digital banking license impacting incumbent banks, whether or not incumbent banks like UnionBank should be also pursue an existing license in the same sense that LandBank has with OF Bank. Henry, you have the floor.
Hi, thanks, Vincent. So, you'd think that an incumbent bank would not have any need for a digital bank license, but actually, it's the incumbent banks that would need a digital bank license. And they're the ones who would be able to maximize the advantage of having a digital bank, because the banking business is a huge conglomeration of several other services. So if you look at retail and consumer, that can be best served by a digital bank platform. And on the wealth management, trade finance, capital markets, foreign currency, commercial real estate, that would be on the major bank. So if you look at it, the one that would have a big disadvantage would be digital banks that are not affiliated with a huge bank. So the one that Land Bank did with its OF bank, that's a perfect synergy between a digital bank and a huge commercial bank. Was what good would your banking business be if all you do is give out deposits and interest? You won't be able to make money on the flip side. And Governor Chuchi was smiling because she knows very well that you need to redeploy those funds. Second, the aspiration of BSP Indo Digital Bank is to reach the 70% adult Filipinos that some of them have been excluded. That, I guess, is a perfect way of doing it. Imagine talking to the marginalized sector of society about wealth management and investment instruments and what have you, without even onboarding them with the basic opening a deposit account, and maybe on the off chance that they get approved, they get a retail loan. So it's a perfect combination. So I guess most of the incumbent banks should be applying for a digital bank. Thanks, Vincent.
Thank you. That's actually quite an interesting perspective, because if you compare to the other ASEAN countries, you see most of the applicants are non-bank. So this is a very unique circumstances. Perhaps we could also dive into a bit later as well. But next, let's have Rudy on stage to talk about what his views are. And Rudy, you've worked with a few banks around the region, and you also have some customers who are applying. What do you see the implications of this as?
Yeah, and I have one customer here on the panel as well, which is quite digitally savvy too, Noel, representing BPI. But keeping that aside, Vincent, I echo to a large extent what Henry said. That the traditional incumbent banks probably need this entire enabler of a digital banking license to really differentiate. And the traditional incumbent banks have a lot of advantage going into this because of their legacy. And a lot of people say that legacy is a disadvantage. I would not like to look at it that way. I see legacy as an advantage because the infrastructure is in place, the network is in place, the human resources in place. All you need is a right operating model with the right mentality to launch this digital offering. So I'm seeing this quite prevalent in a lot of countries, and we have seen that in Philippines with Land Bank and OF Bank. One of our customers in Vietnam, a very large bank, they spun off a completely new digital entity and completely different brand, which is being powered by the parent bank. So this is something that we are observing. But at the same time, we are also observing two other trends. One trend is, as you mentioned, Vincent, in other countries, we are also observing completely non-banking institutions coming in and trying to get into the banking arena. And I think in Philippines also, there are a couple of cases of that happening, which has at least created a lot of buzz. We will wait for the actual results to show how good or bad they were. But I think a lot of buzz, a lot of positivity in the industry is happening. So that is also happening at the same time. But the question then remains is that, do these guys, and again, without naming them, I think we are also about to start working with one of these such completely new banks. But the point is that, can these guys sustain this journey entirely on their own, or are they going to, at some point of time, look at partnerships with either the big banking players, right, or look at partnerships with other non-banking institutions like telcos? For example, I personally know that there are such spin-offs or such completely non-banking institutions which are coming into the Philippines, and they're looking at huge partnerships with the likes of a Globe or a Smart to really widen their network, widen their customer base, not wait for acquiring customers from ground zero, but look at onboarding the customers which are there using a Globe or a Smart and bringing them on their platform. So that is another trend that I'm seeing, Vincent, in the market. And then there is a third trend where traditional banks, incumbent banks, are saying, I don't want to spin off anything within my own parent bank. I'm going to change this around and make the parent bank itself much more digital. And again, we are seeing a lot of these examples across the region where these banks are very old, 100 years old, 150-year-old banks, and they are completely transforming their own ways of operation. They're transforming their own business model and saying that this is digital. So again, there is no right or wrong in my perception. I'm seeing all sorts of banks doing all sorts of experiments, is what I would like to say. But it is good times for us, because we are talking to so many different types of people, so many different types of institutions in different stages of their journeys. It really helps us as a platform organization to keep on adding those insights into our platform and make the platform more and more suited to how these banks are trying to adapt to the change.
Thank you, Rudy. I guess that also segues nicely into passing the session over to your client from BPI, right?
Yeah.
Noel, you have the floor. Walk us through your thoughts, and maybe if you could also share with us whether BPI has any plans in this space as well. That would be interesting.
The BPI is not much different from any banks. No? We always look at opportunities on what makes sense to us. As Rudy has mentioned, there's no right or wrong answer on whether we need to spin off a different brand, whether it's going to be a within the own mother bank, just digitalize as much as possible. The question there is, what are you trying to achieve? No? If you will see the business context of digital banks or the neobanks, challenger banks, they're strong in the acquisition space. No, if you look at all the global case studies on this, all the success would have a certain point that it stops, right? Because how many credit cards, how many debit cards, how many attractive simple products can you sell, right? There will come a point wherein you're maxed out. All the consumer or retail customers that you want to acquire has already been onboarded, especially those lifestyle-based, segment-based digital play. Right. So what they end up doing, if I can say, some of them started selling that whole business to the bigger banks. Right. They're saying, "Can I sell you this brand and you take with it, and then let it be your feeder program for your other products and services." So that's a play that can be done, right? And some banks are saying that I'm going to use digital for financial inclusion, right? Now, financial inclusion doesn't mean they don't have money, right? It's just they're unbanked, right? Unbanked doesn't mean they don't have money. Maybe they're not formal, but they're not into the system, but they have money, right? So it could be attractive for some of these players to go after them, right? There may be certain behavior, there may be certain demands or needs that the incumbents are not seeing, right? So this is what, to me, this is the value of having new players coming in. They bring a new perspective, right? They need a new perspective that the other banks, incumbent banks, have not seen in the past, especially those coming from successful experience from other countries. Right? So what is right or wrong? At the end of the day, it's what is the objective and what business are you going to go after?
Thank you for the insights, Noel. I think if anything, at least some of these new players might also kind of trigger competitive spirit among the incumbents to also improve whatever digital services they have as well, right? Now, before we move on to the next question, just to quickly check with Noel and Henry to see if they have any plans to apply. And then maybe we can move to Chuchi to see if she has any thoughts on this particular topic before we move on to the next question. Noel, any plans to apply with BSP?
As I've said earlier, we are always evaluating where we are, right? We have seen the applicants, we have seen the approved players. We are constantly in review of this, right? So at this moment, whether we're going to apply or not, all I can say is we are constantly reviewing.
All right. Thank you for that, Noel. Henry, are you able to comment on UnionBank's moves on this?
Well, we've already submitted our application, so
Very
I
nice.
know the governor's hopefully going to look at it favorably. Thank you.
Very cool. Let me pass to the DG to talk about this now. Chuchi, any comments on this
Thank you,
topic?
Henry. Definitely, Henry. I will. We will. Yes, Vincent.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, very cool. So let's move on to the next topic. While I have you on stage, maybe we can just ask the next question directly to you. So a lot of the things that the panelists have spoken about is heavily involved in financial inclusion, and certainly financial inclusion remains a top priority for the Philippines. So let's talk about how we can further enable this through sound regulatory policies, what you've done in the past, and what you're looking to enable in the future to further this goal. Talk to us about that, Chuchi.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Vincent. Actually, of course, it's one of the advocacies of the BSP, but under our amended charter, the BSP charter, it has become already one of the mandates included as one of those in the BSP already. So it's not just anymore, of course, an advocacy, but that advocacy has developed really into now more of a commitment on the part of the BSP. But this is also to clarify that, of course, when we talk of financial inclusion, it should not be at the expense of financial stability. So there's, of course, always this balancing act. And so we cannot have a, let's say, an achieved target as far as financial inclusion is concerned, but it has also, let's say, an adverse impact on financial stability, then at the end of the day, it's not considered to be an achievement as well. So there has to be a balancing act on this one. And so that's why in creating, for the BSP side, in creating enabling regulations, we have what we call, of course, as the non-negotiables when it comes to our evaluation of proposals. So, of course, among the non-negotiables are as far as anti-money laundering is concerned. Um, and of course, we also recognize consumer protection. So there are non-negotiables in the part of BSP as we try to open our minds and as we try to allow innovation to flourish in the Philippine financial system. There is this balancing act that we need to do. So that's why, of course, with innovation, there is also this review, of course, of safety and soundness, the risk management system. Recently, of course, we are paying attention also with all of this digitalization, electronic platforms, and everything there. Attendant to that is, of course, paying attention to the fraud management as well of the bank. So there has to be really a holistic approach on this. We'll not just be leaning towards one area and forgetting to take a look at the other. So that's about it, Vincent. Thank you.
Thank you. All very important consideration. The dog in the background seems to strongly agree with you and cheering you on as you speak. So yeah, thanks for that views. Let's move on to Henry just spoke earlier. Maybe we would move on to Noel. Noel, can you talk to us about how you see digital technologies enabling financial inclusion, and maybe some of the digital initiatives that you've done in BPI towards furthering that goal? You have the floor, Noel.
Thank you, Vincent. Well, probably it's a good segue for me to mention that BPI have a pure digital bank, a wholly owned subsidiary called Banko. It's I can say it's very advanced compared to us in terms of it's running on the latest technology. It runs on the cloud. It's supporting financial inclusion. In fact, that's one of their charters, financial inclusion, and empowering right the small businesses in the outside of the urban areas, right? So we do have that arm, and that's something that uh, complements the mother bank in reaching out to our customer base. Now, in terms of technology, um, technology is available to anyone, right? It's just a question of how much can you afford to use this technology, and whether the market that you are addressing is ready for such a technology, right? In as you know, 7,100 islands, the coverage of communication signals is still needs to be improved. And while the bank is ready or the institution is ready to service them, these are the limitations that we need to work around with. Right? Now, how do you serve these kind of people? This is where your some of your technology to do your credit scoring could be augmented by some artificial intelligence, machine learning, so that you can improve your scoring models with them, right? So again, banks makes money on the deposit and what you take and then what you lend, right? That's basically banking, in a very simple terminology. We make money on net interest margin and some of the fees, right? So unless we're very clear that there is a strong business case along that line, it will just become like a marketing expense, right? Which is not a good business practice. So that's where we are. We are digitally able to reach out
Mm,
to the financial inclusion in the unbanked segment.
mm,
As I've said, they're not poor. Most of them are not poor. A lot of them are not poor. It's just that they're unbanked.
mm. I think that's an important distinction to draw. Thank you for sharing some of the initiatives that you're working on in the BPI. Let's move on to Henry to have Henry talk about how he sees the digital technologies enabling this and what they're doing at UnionBank. Henry, you have the floor.
Yeah, Vincent. So I'll take a different track. So I guess Rudy also covered what's happened on the consumer side of servicing banking customers from digital platforms, digital onboarding. Prior to this meeting, I came from our resiliency committee organization, and we're now using technology in terms of wearables and sensors to come to bear to protect our branch personnel. Because in Union Bank, nobody needs to go to the headquarters. Actually, 90% of our people are working from home, except those that to report to the branches. And we do still have customers that need to go to the branches. So I think we've done a lot of work in ensuring that our customers who use our digital rails are serviced well, and our employees are safe from maintaining the digital infrastructure. But what of those employees that need to go to the branches? So we're working on wearables that we've proof of concept in one of our branches, where the branch personnel wear a wearable that will detect their temperature, their SPO level, even proximity. Now imagine, there's no choice. You have to balance public service with safety, and you need to open your branches, and we do comply with that. But beyond providing them PPEs and the reactive medical care if they get sick, we're now using technology to make sure that even before they go to the branches, we're monitoring their health metrics. We've not launched that in all of our branches, but we're experimenting with one. And I think the prospects are good because in a couple more months we will keep continuing ideating. And if there's one thing that we're passionate about right now is to save people's lives, especially our frontliners. So that's how we're using technology at this point, where we can make the most difference in our employees' safety in the meantime.
I think that's important, right? Because at the end of the day, innovation is not just for the customers, but it's also for our own employees. And after all, they are the frontliners that perhaps are doing a lot of work in serving the underserved as well, who may be more comfortable with the physical channel. So that's certainly an interesting approach as well. Let's move on to Reedy. Reedy, of course, again, Backbase, you guys do serve quite a number of regions as well. So you probably have different examples or case studies to share. Talk to us about how you see your clients using digital technologies to enable financial inclusion.
Yeah, I think you added this point at the end, Vincent, that technology to enable, right? And that is what we always believe, that technology is always going to be an enabler. It's technology itself in its own isolation cannot be a differentiator. The differentiator will really come from what is the business problem that you're trying to solve. And the business problem could as well be, as Henry mentioned, safeguarding your own employees, or in a slightly more lighter scenario, how do you ensure that your employees who are servicing your customers are not ignored in terms of, let's say, their engagement, their experience, and they don't have a mainframe based black screen in which they have to service their customers. So I think the main problem is the business problem, which needs to be defined very well. The question that all banks need to ask, and I think the banks that are being represented today, I think they have been able to ask that question well in advance, is that how are you trying to differentiate yourself as a bank versus your competition in the market? How does your bank look like in 10 years' time? And I'll give you a couple of examples. We all talk about digital-only banks. We all talk about successful digital banks. And I'll take two examples which I like to talk about. One is Revolut, which has now come to Asia as well. Now, today, Revolut is a big brand. But how did Revolut start off as? They just started off doing travel currencies and travel cards. That was just the single problem that they were trying to solve. They were not trying to do so many things. And today, from there on, they have really built on top of that foundation, and they have started offering so many other things. The other example that I like talking about is on the SME space, which is unfortunately a slightly ignored area, in my opinion. Is if you look at this example of Coconut, which is an accounting app for SMEs, and that is the only problem that they're trying to solve today. So I think the way all these organizations have used technology is that, okay, here is the business problem that I'm trying to solve. And the business problem cannot be that I want to offer loans, deposits, cards. That's not the business problem. Accounting was a problem that the guys at Coconut were able to identify. And then they used technology wisely to solve that problem. Right. So what the common theme that I'm seeing, Vincent, across the region, and as I said, I work across the region, is that banks which have a foresight, which have a vision, are more and more not looking at digital in silos. They are not looking at digital as an isolated, that, okay, mobile is digital, contact center is digital. I think all banks, or at least banks who are really modernizing, have moved away from that concept. And banks like, modern B2C organizations, you take the example of a Grab, a Netflix, all these, I think banks have also realized that investing in platforms, horizontal platforms, which are going to orchestrate the overall journey, which is going to orchestrate the engagement, look at customer journey in a complete holistic manner, starting from prospecting to doing cross-sell, upsell, and servicing, and not look at customer journeys also as individual silos. That is where I see more and more investments going towards, on the foundation, on the platforms, rather than putting up a good-looking UX on a mobile app, which is in my opinion the right way, because for a long time banks have just looked at digital as a good-looking UX on the mobile app, and today probably the banks who have done that are realizing that that was not the right strategy to sort of do 3 or 4 years back. So yeah, that's what we are seeing across the industry. As I said earlier, that's where we are also investing in our own product and platforms to sort of make it as that central orchestration engagement hub, which is just not going to render a good-looking experience, but orchestrate this entire ecosystem and the value that the bank and its customers really needs.
That's a good point, right? At the end of the day, if you just focus on the UX, UI, then essentially just putting a nice coat of paint into an old house, right? It's still an old house. And inside, you need to really think about the kind of value and services you're bringing to your consumers. Thank you for bringing up that point. Now, before we move on to the next question, just wanted to remind the audience to feel free to ask questions. There are over 300 of you tuning in live from across all the channels. Do ask us question via the YouTube link that's within all the various LinkedIn and Facebook posts, and we'll try to address the question best we can. So I'd like to move on now back to the same topic that we were talking about earlier. So we spoke about financial inclusion, and Henry also brought up about how they are serving customers in the branch, which got me thinking about a segment of the population who may or may not still be comfortable with digital technologies, right? So there's a lot of instances in countries like China, in countries like Sweden, where they're extremely cashless. There are people who felt left behind by some of these advancements of technology. So I guess, Chuchi, from the viewpoint of a regulator, do you see a risk that this development of digital services, digital technologies, leaving behind some segments of society? And do you see a digital divide happening in the Philippines at the moment?
Yeah, thank you, Vincent. Actually, our goal really is, once, let's say, a new product is being introduced in the market, there should really be also some kind of financial education aspect to it before a product is being rolled out. And the banks are aware of that kind of requirement by the BSP. So that's for the new products. But I think with the way things are right now, meaning after what happened during the pandemic, now being a participant, let's say, in a financial ecosystem, is not anymore a matter of meaning convenience, but it has become actually already a necessity. And so I think people, I've encountered cases, and those also have shared to the BSP that there are this group, no, usually, of course, the older ones, they may not be that comfortable, of course, using digital technology, but the pandemic has served as a catalyst. And so this group of, this particular segment of the society has seen the need to already also sort of level up on this matter. And so I think it will just be in phases. Initially, it would be seen as something like there's a digital divide or something, but I think in a matter of time, there are phases that will sort of be experienced by certain people. And so there are still traditional banks to, of course, serve these types of customers. At the same time, traditional banks are even also, of course, allowed as what we call electronic and payment services special licensing that we have also afforded those banks not yet ready to really go fully digital, meaning, like, for instance, of course, another thing, it's a digital bank already. And so I think the digital divide is just a matter of, for me, maybe to some, a perception when you don't really know what's happening on the ground. But the way things are, as I mentioned, given pandemic, it has become already a necessity and not anymore just out of convenience. So that's the way things are right now here in the Philippines. And so I think even Henry and Noel can also share their experiences on this. I've encountered during a lot of meetings that I've have, of course, not just presided but been into. There will always be preceded by sharing of participants that normally or previously I don't do this and that when it comes to digital means or the digital way of doing things. But given pandemic, then they were forced to do this. And so I think it's just a matter of time, or it will be just in phases that those segments of society can really, of course, as well catch up.
So what I'm
Thanks.
sensing you're saying, thank you, Chuchi. What I'm sensing you're saying is that that gap is narrowing, and that's thanks to a combination of conscious efforts from both the regulator and the industry to, one, educate the consumers, and two, of course, the pandemic has made a lot of things necessary, as you said, right? So very cool. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Let's move on to Noel to kind of talk about what they are doing to limit the digital divide, getting more customers digital, whether he sees there's any risks of segments of society being left behind. Noel, go ahead.
Yeah, in the last 2 years, we have created a lot of uh, educational materials via the social media, including YouTubes and Instagrams and so on. No? We have been educating, providing advices, tips, security tips, financial tips, know what it can do, what value does it bring to them, etc., etc. Right? But the most crucial one was just during this pandemic that it's not the financial needs that created the adoption. Right? It is, especially as uh, DG Fonacier said, that the segment, the more seniors people in the segment who were really not keen on adoption to digital, all of a sudden, not being able to do the weekend, seeing the family, being with their grandchildren, with their children, and so on and so forth. All of a sudden, have to learn Zoom, have to learn the Messenger, etc., etc. So they were say, I want to learn that. They're the one who said, I want to learn it because now I need to talk to my grandchildren. I need to see them, etc., etc. And it became the conduit for adoption, right? After getting used to doing a swipe on the screen, touching and typing, it became easier now for them. Oh, you can do this now. You want to check your balance. You want to buy something. No, there are hyper local communities that sells products among the villages or the subdivisions, as we call it in the Philippines. They can now do a community buying. No? And this all started because that need of being uh, integrated with their families, not losing touch in their families during the lockdown, drove the digital adoption. So, and we reinforced that, and we gave targeted messages, targeted educational materials to this group, right? So we always emphasize that while it is good, while digitalization provides convenience and all the values in it, it is still a shared security that they have to look out for, right? Digitalization also created creative criminal minds not just in the country, I think globally, right? So we have to keep abreast of that as well, and and advise our client on how to protect themselves as well.
Naturally, I think, as businesses see necessity to go digital, so do criminals as well. So we have to keep up with that. So a real quick one. There's a question from the audience that I think is in line with this current topic that we're talking about. So I'll just post the question to Noel, and then Henry can also take the question as well. So we spoke about digital divide and whatnot, right? So the question from JC Santiago is about whether or not banks should cut the number of bank branches given the rate of digitization. Noel, do you want to quickly address this before we move on to Henry?
Okay. Again, it's by the way, no relationship to the person question.
It just occurred to me.
It just okay. Again, uh, it's not, it's cutting branches or so on should not be the right term. No, I think it's really what are the needs of the customer base that you are serving. Right? Bank exists to serve the customers. Right? Cutting branches is a mean probably for a greater objective or higher objective, right? So I don't want to use cutting branches as the actions being taken. It should be looked at what makes sense for the needs of the consumer. If there's no point putting up branches wherein only 3 people walks in anymore, right? Um, it means that that area probably is ripe for digitalization or already move on, right? It's no different from urban planning, right? You select a certain locations and the demographic has changed. It's time to move on, and it necessitates redevelopment, right? So that's what I looked at. We don't want to call it cutting branches. It's really rationalizing what's good for the customer.
Thank you for that, Noel. So let's move on to Henry. And of course, Henry, there's 2 dimensions to the question, the digital divide, the society, and also branches as well. You have the floor, Henry.
Yeah, so quickly on the branches, I agree with Noel. It's not a question of cutting. It's a question of relevance. How do you make your branches more relevant? And that's why a few years back, we've already went on a digital branch transformation. Actually, no less than the deputy governor inaugurated that first transform branch. Thank you, ma'am. And we've rolled it out. And we've also evolved it to have a track platform. We called it Bank on Wheels, where it's a full-blown, it's not an ATM on wheels, but it's a full-blown bank that has been useful during the pandemic situation, where we can send bank services to the basketball areas in the plazas where the beneficiaries would need the amelioration loan. So it's not a question of cutting; it's a question of making it more relevant. And I think branches will stay at least in the near future. Now on the digital divide, it's narrowing. It's really narrowing. Any bank that would go through a digital transformation would always go through the customer journey map. And when we did our customer journey map 4 years back, we realized, wow, as Noel mentioned, people doing the Zoom, Netflix, and what have you, it's the millennial profile. So are we building a bank for the millennials? Yeah, maybe so. Anyway, they're the emerging consumer of the future. Guess what? During the pandemic, we're all millennials now. Everybody knows how to watch Netflix. Everybody knows how to use Zoom. With the snap of a finger, everybody became millennial. So it was fortunate that the digital platforms we've implemented have actually been appropriate for the time. So I'll give you some ideas. Before, we were only onboarding around 2,000 new customers a month. We're doing that in a day. And we see the growth ever so escalating in terms of the adoption. InstaPay, when it was launched before, and mind you, from a very small base, we were growing at a robust 40 to 60%. Of course, you can argue it's a base effect. But 3 or 4 years later, during the pandemic, with a bigger base of transaction, we're now growing at a rate of about at least 100% year on year. And we see the trend continuing. Our digital transactions are 340% more than our usual transaction before. So I guess the digital divide has really narrowed. So what are we doing and what do we need to do? We need now to make sure that we protect the gains of the new digital normal. So we're investing in cybersecurity. We're investing in technology that would help our people be more safe and well as they do their work. And we're doing industry cooperation with the regulators and with the other banks to educate our consumers in order to keep their accounts safe and not be prone to, as you mentioned, Vincent, we also have to be several steps ahead of the criminals because they're also doing their own digital transformation. So that's what we're doing. I think the divide has narrowed. We just have to make sure that we do all the effort to make sure that it doesn't widen because of cybersecurity issues and other nefarious activities of threat actors.
Thank you, Henry. One must wonder whether there's somewhere in a criminal organization a chief innovation officer that's banging on about digital transformation. That'd be an interesting sight to behold. Thanks for your view. Let's move on to Reedy. Now, Reedy, I apologize for putting you in a position where everyone has already provided 90% of the insights. It must be challenging to add in anything new. But what do you have for us, Reedy?
Well, just a couple of points, and one is a live example. I was talking to a banker in the Philippines 2 years back when we could have traveled, and I was there in Manila, and a very senior guy. Okay, I'm pretty sure Noel and Henry and everybody would know him, without naming him. And I was telling him about digital first and all of that, and he suddenly stopped me and he said, "What do you mean by digital first? I have this huge network of branches that we have built over this years. Are you saying that we are going to just let go of it?" And I could see that sort of excitement, tension in his face, where he really challenged what I was talking about. And then he mellowed down after a while and he said, "Okay, let's call it as digitally enabled, where my branches are going to coexist along with my digitally savvy customers, and we have to figure out a way of how does my legacy, my future, all of that coexist." So that is, every time somebody asks me this question about branch, brick and mortar going away, I keep going back to this conversation I had. But there's an interesting point that both Henry and Noel mentioned about the unmet needs of the customer. I think Noel mentioned that, and Henry talking about the digital divide slowly going down. And let's take an example of one pain point, which is credit. While we're talking about payments and onboarding, which is very good, but credit itself is such a big pain point in the Philippines. And unfortunately, and guys, please don't get me wrong, I've not seen a lot of banks doing a lot of innovation around lending, around credit. Obviously, we spoke about AML and fraud, which is the underlying backbone. But in terms of, can I get credit across to customers in, let's say, as soon as 1 minute, right? So that's probably an unmet need, which will not only address a digital divide, because whether it's a guy in the province, whether it's a guy sitting in Metro Manila, end of the day, he or she still needs credit. Now, as a bank, can I offer that in a very simple and intuitive manner, hassle-free manner? And that is where I think some of the banks that we are working with today, I'm pretty sure DG Chuchi would be aware of one such bank which has applied for a license, which is also a Backbase customer, UnionBank. We really got sold into their entire vision of the power of one, getting credits out in 1 minute. So, what I'm trying to say here is that brick and mortar, branches, unmet needs, as well as the digital divide, all of that has a coexistence. All of that has a place where they can be addressed from, as I mentioned earlier, trying to solve simple problems and looking at making those solutions for those problems much more better and much more intuitive. So that's the only point that I wanted to add here, Vincent. One good example of a conversation that I really cherish, and then something else around about our philosophy as well.
That must have been an interesting conversation. What I would give to be a fly on the wall to that conversation. So that actually segues nicely into one of the questions that I had, and a few of the questions that the audience is asking. So I'm just gonna try to thematically organize the question. Some people are asking about documentation, identity, and whatnot, right? And I think at the end of the day, if we talk about financial inclusion, there's no financial inclusion without digital inclusion, without credit inclusion, like Reedy said, right? So I guess maybe Chuchi can comment on, from a regulatory standpoint, what has been done to enable more credit inclusion, more data inclusion, more identity inclusion to enable more of these digital services to be rolled out more effectively. Chuchi, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Vincent. Actually, for the BSP, we launched last year in October the Digital Payments Transformation Roadmap. And so it has, of course, some components to it. And so the digital payment streams, and then, of course, we talk about digital finance infrastructure, as I mentioned a while ago, and, of course, also the digital governance standards. And so with these components, we hope, of course, to be able to build an ecosystem, and wherein there is interoperability. But currently, we're building on a credit risk database. This is our collaboration with the Japan International Cooperation Agency, or the JICA, because admittedly in the Philippines there's not really a some kind, especially for the SMEs, MSMEs, including the micro, a database of sorts to capture information from all of these borrowers here, for them, of course, to build history as to their ability to, of course, be part of already of the meaning in credit. They would be able to access credit, and so that's one. And then, of course, we hope that with the digital banks, will not just be, of course, onboarding, because as what, of course, Henry's pointed out, then all those funds that you were able to gather, then you need to lend them. So, and that's where I think also the discussion a while ago, whether you want to be a player, a standalone player as a digital bank, or is this something like existing conventional banks spinning off to a digital, or side by side under one group, conventional and the digital. And the other one is also our recent undertaking, and I think Henry can be more, as well as Noel, be more eloquent in trying to explain the things on the open finance or the open banking. And that's really something that we hope would be able to later on result in developing products and services that would really cater to a particular segment of the market. And so those are some of our initiatives, or should I say, projects in the near term, and of course in the medium term, that we hope to be able to achieve that. And so this segment of the MSMEs is, I agree that there's really much to be done there as far as access to credit is concerned. So those are some of, the two guys can be more eloquent on the open finance and how will it really address this kind of. But of course, as I said, with safeguards. Again, there will always be those non-negotiables on our part. So, thank you, Vincent. I think the two gentlemen can also, of
Sure,
course,
Chuchi.
weigh in on this. Thank you.
Before I pass the session to them, I think there's a quick question about, because you spoke about the interoperability of payment systems. So maybe you could just quickly answer one of the questions from one of the audience who's asking about the national QR code standards, whether it be enabled for not just P2P, but also to businesses as well.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I think I don't know if the other sector, we're considering sector like payments and the currency and payment sector. I'm in the financial supervision sector. We're collaborating, and actually we're already set to launch the QR code. And if it's not preempting, of course, let's say the governor, and that will happen already this Friday. This
Very
Friday,
nice.
the
We'll
launching
keep an
of
eye
the
out.
QR,
Yeah.
and the two gentlemen are smiling because they know also very well their participation. So
Surprise!
it's coming soon. So as in very, very soon. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that sneak preview. So, Noel, back to the question of data inclusion, credit inclusion, digital inclusion, and also a new thing to add on to that, which what the DG was talking about, is how open finance enables all this, right? So maybe you can talk to us about that, and then we can pass this session over to Henry. Go ahead, Noel.
Yeah, just to go back, no, it's regarding the credit inclusion. It is not that the financial institution doesn't want to provide that credit. It is the lack of uh, qualified information, right? The sheer questionable identity of the person, right? And then the lack of data to support such analysis, right? Credit credit decision is relying on the richness of information that is made available, right? So in the absence of this, or even lack of information on this, it's very difficult for organizations to make decisions on providing lending products to these people, no? So with the government's trust now on the national IDs, and that would be fueling the, the the identification of who is really conducting these transactions. That could serve as a data points for credit decisions. So we're gonna get there. I think we're seeing good developments, but as of today, that's basically uh, the hurdles that we see. Now, for the open banking framework, uh, me and Henry are, I think, one of the volunteers who are the participants on that. No, we have seen this in other countries. No, we have seen this in other countries, and there are, at the end of the day, the winner here are not just the banks. It's everybody, right? The the third party who is providing the service, and the end customer, right? Now, how it will evolve and pan out, I think this is the reason why a pilot is going to be uh, conducted, and we will get insights. No, we will learn from that, because what makes sense in another country may need to be localized in the Philippines. So there are some nuances that we have in the country that needs to be addressed. Uh, Legislation may need to be revisited, but at least what we are seeing is the strong support of the regulators and participants like us, uh, to experiment and see, no? And see how we can create value to the end customer.
Thank you for that, Noel. Let's move on to Henry to share his side of things.
Yeah. So Vincent, so as Deputy Governor mentioned, Union Bank now is a huge account acquisition machine, and we will top that off by adding a digital bank play. So what do we do with the redeployment of funds? And that's where credit becomes very, very important. And there are two components to credit. One is two components to ensuring that we redeploy credit properly. And one was mentioned by Noel, actually. One is, how do you prove the identity of the person borrowing? And there are two landmark, I think, initiatives that would ease that. One is the national ID system. So I'm glad that it's been implemented, and NEDA's doing a great job together with PSA to roll it out in spite of the pandemic. In spite of the pandemic, they're rolling out the national ID. And there's some technology play there. Imagine if a bank can immediately onboard somebody with a national ID. So that takes care of your identity issue as well as your AMLA requirements. And then there's the other initiative on open finance. And open finance will allow customers now to share with permission their personal information from one bank to another bank. And that's powerful. That imagine from a consumer standpoint, you can now select from which bank you can avail of credit from. And you can instruct your bank to share your information to the selected bank. That's a powerful incentive for people now to shop around for credit. So the first portion, I think, is going to be addressed by those two initiatives. And this year is going to be a turning point. The second is actually credit risk rating. So now that you've identified the person who's going to borrow, how do you assess if the person is able to pay or is credit worthy for the money that you will deploy? That's where we have, and happy to say this, we have 6 PhDs working, 6 people with PhDs working on artificial intelligence, data science, and in fact, tomorrow there will be a big launch about the initiative of our parent shareholder on data science. That's something that Union Bank has been working on for quite a while, and now we're coming up with risk models that would make credit scoring more efficient and effective. So those are the two components of making sure that we redeploy the funds that we're able to accumulate from from the customer acquisition that we've been doing.
It's always fascinating to learn what you guys are doing, both BPI and UnionBank. That's a lot of cool stuff that you guys are working on. And I guess at the end of the day, if you can eKYC one bank, the same eKYC can be used across banks. So that's definitely a fantastic initiative. Now, really, do you want to add anything to this? Because you spoke a bit about credit earlier. Is there any additional things you want to talk about in this space, or should we move on to the next question?
No, I think let's move on. Most of the points have been well covered, so let's move on.
Okay. Cool. Anyone else want to add anything before we move on to the next topic? I think Noel, you wanted to talk a bit more about the open finance. Okay.
Yeah, because I was really smiling when Henry said that they're creating a new way of doing some credit scoring through artificial intelligence, right? Just imagine to extend that in the open finance, right? The ability for that customer to say, can I take my credit score and make every bank bid for my business, right? Instead of me applying, as I'm the consumer, instead of me the one applying, I have my credit scoring well put up, and then I can publish that and tell all the banks, I need a loan. You bid for my business, right? That's the power of that information. It's now creating the tremendous value to the consumer, right? Passing it back to them, right? That's some things that I see will happen in the future.
It's certainly a utopian scenario. That would be cool if it could be implemented down the road. Thank you for sharing that possible future. Okay, so we've unfortunately run very short on time. Now, I'd like to apologize to those whose questions we cannot answer because there's nearly 400 people tuning in. There's a lot of answers coming in, questions coming in. So again, I apologize that we are unable to take all of it. But we now have to move on to some closing thoughts. So for some closing thoughts, maybe we can get the DG to share about what's her view on the future of digital financial services as a whole, and moving forward, what kind of technologies she thinks that banks should focus on down the line. Chuchi, you have the
Yeah,
floor.
thank you, Vincent. Actually, as I already mentioned a while ago, prior to going live, I said the regulator, of course, and the players in the industry are one in really achieving, of course, a safe, stable, efficient, of course, inclusive, and innovative. And that's where this kind of conversation would really be very, should I say, interesting, and will become productive as we try to open ourselves to innovation. So, on the part of the regulator, we really, of course, keen, or should I say, we're not just, but we're doing already actually providing the enabling regulations on our part, but at the same time also mindful, of course, of the risks attendant to it. But at least there is this conversation about openness to embrace innovation, and that, of course, what we have in mind is so also with the regulator is serving the needs of our of the customers of the bank, and that's becoming customer centric, or the customer centricity itself is, of course, um, would really be something that I think everyone, I mean, the players in the industry would like to adopt. And it's not just, of course, trying to bring in business, but the two gentlemen are really always saying serving the needs of their clients. And so when it comes to technology, I think although for the big players they're already there, but some of them are the cloud computing, of course, also on the API now with the open finance. So more and more this types of technology, as well as, of course, also AI and the other more, should I say, like some the CBDCs for central banks, and we're actually also trying to really dig deeper into it, and so I think it's getting to be more exciting in this financial services space, and especially with in the Philippines with demographics, the millennials. So average age in the Philippines is 24, and so with that kind of demographics, there's really a lot of promise. In the not just in the retail space or consumer space, but of course, other products that all of this millennials or all of this, be it investments, insurance, and all of these things, it's getting really to be exciting. And so with that, of course, I thank fintech news for this opportunity as well for BSP to expound on our not just on what's happening in the Philippines, but the moving forward on our collaboration, of course, with we're not just on a regulator-regulatee relationship, but it's really more of collaboration, because at the end of the day, again, we go back to serving the needs of um, Filipinos, not just Filipinos, but serving the needs of clients in general. Thank you, Vincent.
Thank you. And certainly, we're very grateful to have you here as well. You brought up CDBC, which is a topic I think I can ask you probably 2 hours worth of questions about that, but unfortunately, we don't have the 2 hours. But again, thank you for joining us. Let's move on to Reedy for closing thoughts, some technology focus that you think banks should look at moving forward.
Yeah, I'll make it very quick. From a technology perspective, Vincent, as I've mentioned earlier, banks and not very relevant for UnionBank and BPI, because both these guys have been real visionaries in terms of modernization of technology. But I think generally banks in the region really need to look at technology as a horizontal platform and not as siloed solutions, not as point solutions, because the more you start investing in point solutions, the more you get intertwined into a huge mess, which you will see over a period of time. So it is time for going in for horizontal platforms, orchestrating a lot of customer engagement and employee engagement. But I think from a short, medium, and long term, while I think Noel mentioned earlier, there's going to be a lot of price war. There's going to be the new banks coming in offering, let's say, low interest rate or high deposit rate. But from a long-term perspective, end of the day, it's always going to be the customer loyalty, which is going to be the yardstick for banks to measure how well have those technology investments gone in. So that's just from me in terms of closing thoughts, Vincent. But DG, Chuchi, Noel, Henry, real pleasure to talk to you guys, and thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Rudy, and thank you for sharing your thoughts as well. Noel, your closing thoughts and the technologies that you think the industry should be focused on. Go ahead, Noel.
Well, with so many technologies available now, and they themselves keeps on evolving, right? Um, Organizations must just learn to adapt, no? And take upon themselves that it's like your mobile phone, that every 2 years you need to upgrade, right? So it is a cost of, it is an investment in doing business. You just have to commit yourself, no? And digitalization to me is not should not be the end, right? Digital is not the end. The true yardstick or metrics of this is what is the business outcome of that, right? At the end of the day, if you're not running a good business, you cannot uh, flow it back to good customer products and good customer service. So metrics must be relooked at. Shareholder returns, um, market cap, right? That creates the stability and trust that is needed by every customer, right? And to sum it up, all of this is the winner will always be the customer, right? Given there will be given choice, there will be cherry pick which organization can provide the best service for them, they will be the winner, right? So the population is big enough. There's business for everyone.
For sure. Thank you for those thoughts, Noel. Let's move on to Henry for closing thoughts and focus for the industry.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you FinTech News and Backbase for allowing me to share again the journey of UnionBank and to be in the panel with my friend Noel and of course our regulator, Deputy Governor Chuchi Fonacier. It's been a very nice session. The digital divide has narrowed, and I just want to close with during these trying times. I just want to close with the tone of hope that all the aspirations we have about the new digital normal in terms of digital adoption are coming through. So what we need to focus on and what the industry needs to focus on is to continue collaborating to protect the gains. And the areas of cybersecurity and fighting financial crime would be an area that we can come together. And once we've resolved that area, I guess it solidifies the new digital normal. So my parting is just stay safe, everybody. A quick shout out to all our financial industry frontliners. You're doing a heroic job. Keep safe, and we'll see each other hopefully soon physically in another session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Henry. And on that positive note, I think it's the perfect way to end the session. Once again, I'd like to thank all the panelists for really, sharing these insights with all of us. I've certainly learned a lot. I hope the rest of you, the nearly 400 of you tuning in, has learned just as much as I did. And thank you again. If you guys are interested to keep posted on the latest fintech stories, do follow us on Fintech News Philippines, fintechnews.ph. Thank you once again. Take care and have a wonderful day ahead. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.